Podcasting has become one of the hottest content mediums on the planet today. It allows you to connect with your audience, it allows you to establish authority within your niche, and it allows you to solve problems that your customers may have. If you've decided to start a podcast for your brand, you've made a tremendous decision. And if you haven't, today we're going to talk about why you should. My name is Jason Cercone, and this is how to build your brand through podcasting. Hello and welcome to my presentation as part of the 2020 Marketing Pittsburgh Generator Conference. I hope you've been enjoying all of the content from all of the tremendous presenters that have been releasing content to us over the last few days. And today I'm glad you're here because I want to talk to you about the power of podcasting. And in more detail, or in a little bit more tighter focus, how you can use a podcast to build your brand and establish authority within your industry. Now, to give you a little bit of background on myself, as I said at the top there, my name is Jason Cercone. I am the founder and CEO of Cercone Consulting, and I started my own business that is now known as Cercone Consulting several years back. It was originally known as Breaking Brews. My business started as nothing more than a craft beer advocacy blog, and over time, that morphed into me helping different brands throughout Pittsburgh and beyond with various forms of marketing and brand management. And in that time frame, I also started podcasting. And I've worked on several different podcasts over the years. And it was during the ongoing pandemic where I had a little more time on my hands with all of the different closures and the impact that the pandemic had on my clients. It gave me some time to reevaluate and refocus what my business was all about. And I used this time to really zero in on the podcasting aspect of the world. And I was seeing how this medium was growing and how it was becoming such a big part of people's lives. And I was also discovering how podcasting creates a remarkable platform for brands of all shapes and sizes to reach their current audience, to find new customers, to relay information about their brands, to solve problems. There's a number of reasons why a brand podcast is powerful. And it was in that time that I was also working with one of my colleagues on developing a podcast, and it's what I highly recommend, the Business Equation podcast with Nick Bogaz. He's the owner of Caliente Pizza and Draft House. And he's been connecting with entrepreneurs across the globe on many aspects of small business and mindset. It's a great show. The subject matter has been phenomenal, and I've been proud to be a part of that project since its launch a little over a year ago. So I started thinking about how I was helping out Nick with his podcast and realized that this was something that I could do too for everybody. Not just myself in developing my own podcast, but I started thinking that there were a lot of people and a lot of brands that needed assistance in this area. And this is why I felt that way. As I was doing research and finding out different aspects of podcasting from an entertainment level, from a business level, I was discovering a lot of podcasts that were dead. They maybe had one episode, they may have had two, they may have had three, they may have had more than that, but ultimately everything just stopped cold. And I started thinking about, there has to be a commonality here. Why are all these podcasts just stopping dead? And I started thinking about what I was doing for Nick, what I was starting to develop for myself with my podcast, which we'll talk about shortly. And I felt that my services and all of the experience that I've gained in podcasting, I have over 6 years of podcasting experience now. I felt that this could be a tremendous asset for companies and brands that are looking to start a podcast of their own, but don't quite know where to get started or don't have the time to make it happen. So today, I want to talk to you about why making a podcast for your brand is so powerful and why you should highly consider doing one for yourself. So that's a little bit of background on me, but let's get into why you've joined this presentation today. Why is building a podcast for your brand such a powerful tool in today's day and age? Well, there is, again, so many different reasons why a podcast can work for your brand. The Big thing that you're going to want to do, just like any other content strategy that you've ever rolled out, is determine how it's going to work for your brand, why you want to do it, and ultimately how you're going to make it all come together and execute a plan that will allow your podcast to be successful. Now, before we get into all of that in more detail, I wanted to go over some pretty powerful statistics that really drive home the point of why podcasting is such a tremendous asset and why it offers a lot of value to your brand. I'm just going to read these, so I'm not going to be looking at the camera the whole time, so please forgive me. These stats are courtesy of musicoomph.com, and they were compiled as of August 2020. As of August 2020, there are over 1 million active podcasts in existence and over 30 million podcast episodes. Content on podcasts is available in over 100 languages. Here's a good one. 80% of listeners listen to an entire podcast episode or most of an episode. That means they're absorbing the majority of the content offered on any podcast. 70% of the U.S. population are familiar with the term podcasting. 51% of the U.S. population have listened to a podcast. 32% of the U.S. population listen to podcasts every month. 22% of the U.S. population listen to podcasts weekly. And 6% of the U.S. population listen to podcasts every day. So as I said, that was August of 2020. So since then, these numbers have had nowhere to go but up. And we're continuing to see more podcasts enter the realm. So again, very, very popular space to be a part of right now. And the big thing to think about here is even with this immense popularity and the growth of podcasts, think about this. As I said, there's over 1 million active podcasts, which is a pretty big number. But when you put that up against the number of active YouTube channels, which as I jotted down was approximately 31 million YouTube channels, approximately 600 million blogs in existence right now on the internet, a podcast, or podcasting in general, represents a very small fraction of the content medium space right now. What does that mean for you as a brand? It means now is the time to get your podcast out there because you're going to be on the front end of this curve. You're going to be in a spot where your podcast can establish some serious ground in your industry before everybody else gets on board. We're at that stage right now where podcasting hasn't yet gained that full-fledged mainstream velocity, but think about all platforms like websites and social media and how over time the companies that said, that's just a fad, that'll go away, they had no choice but to get on board because this was the way the world operated. So podcasting, we're already seeing evidence of the numbers continuing to climb. It's going to continue to offer you a tremendous platform, and if you're on the beginning of this and on the front end of the curve, you have so many great opportunities to make some noise, and you're going to be in a great space when the rest of the brands in your industry come along and follow suit. So where do people listen to podcasts? Well, pretty much everywhere. There's really no limit to where you can listen to them. People listen in the car. They listen when they're riding public transportation. They listen at the gym. They listen when they're on a walk. I feel like the guy, if you've seen The Founder with Michael Keaton, when he goes up to the McDonald's window for the first time and asks where he can eat everything, and the kid looks at him and says, in your car? On the bench? At your house? That's exactly what I feel like right now relaying this information. The point here is that podcasts are consumed everywhere, and that's pretty powerful too. Podcasting offers a passive listening experience. Now, what that means is that people don't have to have 100% of their attention dedicated to that podcast in order to absorb the content within. When you think about that compared to a blog post or a video on YouTube or Vimeo or anywhere else on the internet, in order to get what you need from that piece of content, your attention has to be 100% focused on what's in front of you. With podcasting, you put your earbuds in and you go about your business, whether that be doing chores around the house or taking a walk or going to the gym, like I said before, or commuting from here to there. Again, podcasting, because of its passive nature, allows people to listen to it in a number of different spaces. And again, that's extremely powerful because if your brand podcast is something that has captivated somebody, they're going to have you in their ear in a lot of different places, especially if they find your episodes after you've already launched your podcast. Let's say, for example, you have 25 episodes out there and someone just found you and they loved your most recent episode. The chances are very high that they're going to go back in your archives and listen to everything else until they get caught up. And while they're doing that, they're further establishing this strong connection with you and your brand. And all of that time in their ear is going to make it very easy for you to communicate with them. And the more they're connected with you, the more they're going to want to do business with you, because you're offering them value and you're offering them information that's helping them solve problems, that's helping them get educated, that's helping them learn. So podcasting is very powerful in that respect, because people are going to have you in their ear in a lot of different places. So continuing on that way, why else are podcasts so popular? Well, think about it. The range of topics that podcasts offer to you are seemingly endless. No matter what you want to listen to, chances are you're going to be able to find a podcast about this. Now, I don't know this to be true, but I actually had this conversation on another podcast, and I should have looked this up, but I'll throw this out there to you if you want an extra homework assignment. Apparently there's a podcast where a guy just reads encyclopedias, just reads them verbatim. So if you want to go check that out, more power to you. But again, I think that exemplifies the fact that you can find a podcast on just about everything. One of the main reasons why podcasting is so popular is because it's just so damn fun. You can have subject matter that's serious, that's entertaining, that's a mix of both. You can bring guests on your show. You can make your podcast what you want it to be, but it's a fun way of communicating with your audience. And you can open it up to have your audience involved by sending you in questions that you then answer on your podcast. You can do live videos as a supplement to your podcast. There's really a lot that can be accomplished with your podcast as the main platform. But without question, developing a podcast is an absolute blast. And once you get yours started, you're going to see why. Now, why are so many companies using a podcast to develop their brand? Well, for one, as I mentioned, it's not a very crowded space. When you hear a million, you may think that it is a crowded space. But in reality, especially compared to YouTube channels and blogs, as I mentioned before, podcasting is still in that early phase. And if you can get your podcast going now, you're going to be in a great spot as time goes on. A podcast will allow you to spread your message to a larger listener base. Now, that listener base is going to continue to grow as you produce more content, and the reach is endless. You may end up connecting with somebody on the other side of the globe, and it may be somebody that chooses to do business with you if you do business in an online aspect or in an online environment. Or it may be somebody that you just form a partnership with and do work with collaboratively. Either way, having a podcast that has that kind of reach is a very powerful tool. A podcast creates a great platform for communicating with current and existing customers. So again, as I mentioned, if you wanted to utilize what your customers have to say, you can bring it onto your podcast. But when your customers come to you, more than likely what they're looking for is an answer to their problems. And if you can deliver that to them in a very entertaining way, in an engaging way, and give them something to look forward to by listening to your podcast, they're not only going to continue to listen every time you put out new content, they're going to tell others to do the same. And that's how your show will grow exponentially. Now, another reason you'll want to use a podcast to establish your brand is it allows you to establish authority within your niche. Now, this is incredibly important these days because there are so many options for people to choose from. And once they find a solution or a source that's going to solve their problems consistently, they're going to stick by that source and they're going to continue to come back to it time and time again. So you want to be that source, and your podcast gives you a tremendous platform for doing that. If your podcast offers evergreen content, meaning it's set up to offer value years down the road, it's going to generate leads and customers and engagement for you for who knows how long. The great thing about a podcast is that it's built to be evergreen, and it is built to offer information. And if you set yours up to where you're delivering answers to questions and discussing various topics that are common issues within your industry, Someone could find it 5 years from now and still find value from it. That's a very, very good asset to have at your disposal, and it allows your business to continue to grow even when you're not producing something on that very subject in the moment. One of my favorite aspects about podcast content is that it can be repurposed for multiple uses across the internet. So once you prepare your podcast scripts and your bullet points and questions for guests and show notes, and actually record your podcast, you can then clip it up into audio clips that can be shared across social media. You can create blog posts, you can create webinars, you can create internet features that go out to different websites. It just requires a little bit of tweaking, but that one piece of content can be repurposed into multiple things, and people can find you and your podcast and your brand on multiple platforms across the web. Okay, I want to take a couple minutes to talk about developing a plan for your podcast. And this is where I feel like a lot of brands and a lot of individuals who start podcasts as well fall short, because they're not considering all of the work that goes into building a podcast. Developing your plan is no different than developing a business plan. You want to have a roadmap that's going to help you work on different aspects of your podcast, much like you did with your business plan. And what it's going to serve as is the foundation on which you build your podcast. So the more you address the key elements at the very beginning before you ever hit the record button, the better off you're going to be for the long-term growth and evolution of your podcast. Now, I could go into a lot of detail on this, but instead, I want to point you towards a link on my website, jasoncercone.com/podcast primer. The podcast primer has a series of questions that you need to ask yourself as you're developing your podcast. Questions such as, what is my podcast why? What do I want to accomplish with my show? How much time can I dedicate to my podcast on a weekly basis? Who is my ideal listener? What is my subject matter? What kind of budget do I have for purchasing equipment or for marketing my podcast? There's a lot of aspects that you need to consider, and I put them in this primer so you can do this before you ever purchase a microphone, turn on a microphone, and start putting content out there. So jasoncercone.com/podcast primer will connect you to this plan. And like I said, having this plan in place is going to allow you to have a very solid foundation on which you can build your podcast on over time. And the more content you produce, the more you're going to thank yourself for having that foundation, because it's going to give you some vision on where things are going to go as your podcast continues to evolve. Okay, now that you have your plan in place, let's talk about preparing to launch your podcast. Now, this is where batching is going to come into play. You want to make sure that you have a significant amount of content prepared before you go live with your show. Why? Well, there's a couple reasons. First, launching your podcast is a very big deal. You should be very excited about it, and you should be very happy to be releasing this content onto the world. You want to have a structure in place that allows you to release multiple episodes in that premiere, because it's going to give your listeners more content to absorb, and it's going to give you more of an opportunity to get those listeners hooked on your show. So you want to have content prepared so you can do that launch and then have content to follow it up. So let's, for example, say if you did a podcast launch that had 5 episodes go live on the first day, if you only recorded 5 episodes and had those ready to go, what are you going to do next? This is where you begin scrambling. And when you start scrambling, that's when your content starts to suffer, because you're not thinking about the quality, you're only thinking about getting it out there so you can keep up with the initial schedule. So it's not a good practice to put all of the content you produce out there and then have nothing to back it up. Now, depending on how often you plan on releasing episodes of your show, that's going to dictate how much you should batch. So if you're doing a daily podcast, whether it's Monday through Friday or whether it's weekends included, you should not launch your show until you have at least 30 episodes recorded. And that may seem like a lot, but think about it. A month's going to fly by. And if you're doing something every day, that content's going to be gone before you know it. If you give yourself that window to have content ready to go, you can keep building on that as time goes on, and then you're always going to have something behind it so you don't fall behind. Now, if you're doing a weekly release or a bi-weekly release, I wouldn't launch with any less than 10 episodes recorded. Again, that may seem like a lot, but when you think about it, that time's going to fly too. And then when you factor in your podcast launch, again, you want to make this a big deal. And there are a number of different ways that you can make it a big deal. I mentioned before, say you drop 5 episodes on the first day. That's one way that you can get a significant amount of content out there and really showcase what your podcast is all about. Now, that's not etched in stone. You can do this any way that you're comfortable with. If you want to do 3 podcasts over 3 days, or 3 podcasts on the first day, or 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening for 3 or 4 days, or you want to just do 1 a day over the course of a week, whatever. You're getting your content out there in a frame that's not what's going to be normal. But you want to release it so people can get acclimated to your show. It gives you more of an opportunity to reach your audience. This gives you more content that they could potentially review and rate and add credibility to your podcast. So you want to keep all these things in mind, and this is why having a launch strategy is going to help you do that. So, in your plan, you should have your strategy in mind of this is how I'm going to debut my podcast to the world. Once you have that plan in place, make sure that you're developing enough content that allows you to do that launch and then have episodes behind it so you can put that content out behind it and not fall behind in your schedule. It's very important, especially coming out of the gates. You don't want to be inconsistent with your releases. If you say you're going to put content out on a Monday, you want to make sure your content is there every Monday, because you're going to start creating habits for folks, and they're going to start to become dependent on hearing your podcast. Their Monday morning commute is not something they're looking forward to because it's the weekend's over and they got to go back to work. But the bright spot is they have your podcast to listen to on the way in. You don't want to take that away from them. So not only in the beginning stages, but through the duration of your podcast, you want to be consistent, and batching your content's not only going to allow you to have a very successful launch and put more content out there, it's going to allow you to stay consistent over time. Now, before you go live with your podcast, in addition to having your content set up, there's a few other steps that you want to take into place. First, promote the hell out of it. Tell everybody you know. Social media, videos, word of mouth, websites, send cards, run up to people on the street and get in their face. Whatever you need to do to let people know that your podcast is coming, do it. There's no such thing as overkill when you're launching something of this magnitude. So make sure you're getting the word spread and give yourself some lead time. Promote it for at least 4 to 6 weeks at a minimum, just to get people acclimated to the fact that, hey, I like this brand and they're about to launch a podcast. So take time to do that. Another step you want to take is to set up your podcast hosting. Now, I'm a big proponent of Buzzsprout, and I will put a link around this video that you can click on to check out Buzzsprout and get signed up. Buzzsprout is a great platform that allows you to upload your content, to manage the analytics, and check out the statistics and see how your podcast is performing. But one of the great things about a podcast host is it allows you to set up the podcast directories that you need your show to filter to. So I'm talking about Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Amazon Music and Google Podcasts. All of these platforms, plus several others, are where people are going to find your show. So you want to make sure that you are set up on all of these platforms before your episodes ever go live. That way, when you do have your big debut on your first day, no matter where a person listens to a podcast, they're going to be able to find it. Now, in order to establish your podcast on these directories, you need to have content in your host. Now, you don't want to lead off with your first episode because then it's going to take time for all of your podcasts to get to these directories. Some of them will get you set up in a day, others take a week, and it really is not something you want to run into with your very first episodes. So to get around this, what you want to do is record a trailer and or an introduction episode. You can do either one or do both, but ultimately the point is to give yourself 2 things with this. With your introduction episode and your trailer, you've got yourself a piece of content that you could share with other podcasters that could help promote your show. And it's something you could play on your social media accounts and through your email newsletters and whatever platforms you have to let people know that your podcast is coming and this is what it's all about. Your trailer and your introduction episode will do both of those things. Once they're in your podcast host, then you can set up your directories. So if you do this a few weeks before your shows go live, you can make sure that you're registered on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, on Stitcher, on Amazon Music, on Spotify, all of the major platforms where people listen to their shows. You'll be on there before your actual episodes go live, and you can plug those links on your social media and let everybody know, hey, if you listen to podcasts on Spotify, my podcast is now live. Go check it out. Go subscribe now. You can get those early subscribers built, so when you get your episodes out there, everything's ready to go, and your new episodes will be filtered to every directory available. So to wrap this section up, developing a plan for your podcast is step number 1. Step number 2 is putting all of the critical elements in place that are going to help you develop a good launch and have your podcast take off from day one. Now, in that podcast primer that I'm going to put a link to right here, you can get some equipment recommendations from me as well. If you go on Amazon.com and just type in equipment recommendations, you're going to get a lot of great information and a lot of good feedback. And you can read reviews and find out everything you need to know. The good thing about getting started with a podcast is the barriers to entry are pretty easy to overcome, especially when it comes to getting your equipment. You don't need to break the bank. I will say do not buy used equipment because you never know what you're going to get, and you don't want to get something that's going to give you bad audio and give people a bad experience right from the start. But go to Amazon.com and you're going to get a lot of selections. The one that I will put in a word for is the Zoom H6 Handy Recorder. It's a little bit more on the expensive side, but it's bar none the best investment that you can make in your podcasting experience. The sound quality is great. It can run on battery power. It can serve as your audio interface on your computer if you're doing podcasts through Zoom or Skype from a long distance, and the world we're in now, that may be a very big possibility. But Zoom H6 Handy Recorder is a great one to get. Zoom actually just released another podcast recorder that's a little less expensive. I haven't had a chance to use that yet, so I can't put my full support behind it, but from what I've seen, the reviews on it have been pretty great. So look on Amazon again. You'll see a lot of great suggestions to get started. So make that plan first, then look at your equipment, and then get ready to launch your show and utilize all these tips to make it a great one. So everything I covered today and much more is information that I cover on my daily podcast known as Pod Theory. You can find Pod Theory wherever you download your favorite podcasts, and you can learn more about the show and listen to every episode at podtheory.com. You can also pick up the podcast primer at jasoncercone.com/podcast primer, and that will help you build your initial plan. Also, I'm going to be adding new resources to my website almost every day, from audio files to videos to blog posts to different podcasting tips. There's going to be a lot of great information that I'm always sharing, so be sure to stay close to jasoncercone.com. And if you'd like to take things a step further and talk to me one-on-one, you can book a free consultation at jasoncercone.com/podservices or click on the book a free consultation link. You can also fill out the brief questionnaire on that Pod Services page that will give me a little bit of information about what you've been experiencing in the podcast world and give me an idea of how we can best connect and make your podcast come to life. In addition to the consulting side, I also do podcast production and can help with your podcast marketing. So depending on what you need, I'm here to help. All right, I'm about to get off the stage here, but as I mentioned at the beginning, my mission is to help more professionals build a successful podcast. And if there's any way that I can help you do that, please know that my door is always open and you can connect with me anywhere, any way you can. If you go to jasoncercone.com/contact, you can connect with me on all social media platforms. Again, you can fill out that brief questionnaire, or you can book a free consultation and we can connect and figure out what we need to do next. So if you've been kicking around the idea of launching a podcast, or if you've made the decision that a podcast is the right approach for your brand, you're in a great spot. Podcasting is fun. Podcasting is engaging. Podcasting is a tremendous platform for establishing your authority in your niche. And a podcast is going to allow you to amplify your brand voice across the entire globe. We're just moments away from the next great brand podcast launching. Will it be yours? Good talk. I'll see you out there.